everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is Kushalmehra. All right, my guest today is Ujjal Dosanjh. Ujjalji is an author. He's former health minister, Minister of Health Canada. He was also the British Columbia Attorney General, a member of Parliament from Vancouver South, and the 33rd Premier of British Columbia. But more than that, if I was to say this, I have been going back and forth to Canada for the last 2 decades now, and Ujjal sir is probably the most respected voice of India in the entire diaspora for me in Canada, and it is a personal honor for me that he has come on this podcast. I've looked up to him. I found out about him when I moved to Canada. I've looked up to him. I got the privilege of meeting him for the first time actually in my life last month, and I told him कि मैं हमेशा आपको सुनता आया और मैं आपको मिल नहीं पाया कभी. So sir, thank you very much for coming.
Happy to be with you.
So, sir, let's start with this. Now it's been almost a week since whatever. I mean, we don't need to tell people what has gone down, whatever has gone down between India and Canada. So, if I was to ask you, what were your initial reactions when you actually first heard of this?
Well, I was in a bit of a shock about the content of the statement Mr. Trudeau made. I wasn't surprised something like that might occur if it's true, if what he alleged is true. I wasn't surprised because I know that India has been at the receiving end from some of these Khalistanis sitting abroad. And that doesn't mean India is justified in doing what it's doing. I think it's against the international law. Just because US and Russia and others kill people in other countries doesn't mean that India should do it. India has arrived in terms of its economic might and in terms of its influence in the world. These kinds of things take India down a notch, at least in the eyes of countries that are smaller, less powerful, like countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, even Britain now. So I think that from that point of view, I was sad too, because I think that India, even though a democracy faultier than perhaps Canadian democracy, but still it's a democracy, and democracies generally are allies and friends, and so I was sad to see a tension between my mother country and my adopted country, and that is hard.
But sir, now here's so let's get right into it. Now, as far as we understand, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, made certain allegations on the House of Commons. Then the Indian side, as much as the last 6 hours ago, when we had a recent piece in the Hindustan Times, the Indian side and even the Indian intelligence sources have been quoted in that piece. Shishir Gupta is no run of the mill journalist. He's a veteran Indian journalist. He's very well respected in international arenas, and India even now is categorically denying of receiving any evidence from the Canadian side, and even the Canadian version of things keeps changing and hopping from one place to the other. Now, we don't want to get into the kerfuffle of, oh, what is a credible allegation, what is credible evidence, because honestly sir, wo karke kuch milega nahi. But what has worried me and why I reached out to you, sir, is the most important reason is the moment this broke down, I was flooded with emails. Now, uh, I have gained a certain level of listener base amongst the diaspora here in Canada too, and I have a huge listener base in India too. So the diaspora was really tensed, and everybody just wrote to me, "Kya kare? Samajh mein nahi aa raha," kind of a situation. Right? We don't know how to react to this. Like, why is and on top of that, now you had the latest, scandal now that an actual Nazi was there in the parliament and everybody was clapping. Now, in such a scenario, if I was an Indian, don't you think an Indian would be like, color me skeptical, but your allegations don't seem to be credible because you can't even vet an actual Nazi entering your parliament?
Well, these things do happen, And I was glad that the speaker apologized, because and acknowledged that it was his fault. It was his constituent that he had introduced, who happened to be a Nazi, and had been whitewashed and cleaned up to be an Allied soldier during the Second World War. And I think that was a mistake. But going back to the original issue, I think I think countries in this kind of a situation usually make allegations and they deny allegations, and international affairs are usually quite muddled, and only sort of minds who pay a lot more attention to these than us can disentangle what's going on. And I think, suffice it to say, that a man has been killed. I didn't know the man, good, bad, or ugly. I believe in an ideal world, countries shouldn't go across borders killing its perceived or real enemies. But having said that, I don't think the West has any right to kind of judge India, because West itself has been doing the same over the decades, not just killing its enemies, the U.S. or Russia, killing its enemies, but in fact, taking out whole governments and establishing dictatorships in their place in the past. So I think that if we get into that blame game, it would not be a fruitful discussion. But the fact is that there is a significant movement in Canada that is bent upon making efforts to dismember India. And my beef with the government of Canada, the politicians in Canada, has been that they've always taken refuge under sort of the freedom of expression rubric. Freedom of expression is very important. It's fundamental to a democracy. And if somebody wants Khalistan, they should be able to say they want Khalistan. But I think it's the obligation of a government in Canada, a friendly country to India, to say, sir, Khalistani sir, or ma'ams, you may ask for Khalistan, but we don't support the dismemberment of India. If somebody had ever said that out loud several times in the last few years, this movement will be next to dead in Canada. When people perceive that the larger society won't tolerate what we're trying to do, then people back off, and that has never been done. In fact, it's always there's a perception, and it has some basis in truth, that Justin Trudeau has been um, surrounded by Khalistani sympathizers and supporters, and not because they can, they are a huge voting bloc. I don't think they number more than 5 or 6% amongst the Sikh population, but they can, that 5 or 6% can win you a close riding. And I think that is the fly in the ointment that we need to understand.
So the biggest problem in this entire scenario, and I don't need to tell you because I don't know how many of my young listeners, because a good 30% of listeners who watch this on YouTube or listen to the audio version are under the age of 25. And I would like to, I know आप मेरे को चिल्लाओगे भी शायद कि क्यों बता रहा है ये सब, मगर बोलना पड़ता है सर, so माफ कर देना. It was in the year 1985, if I remember, that you were brutally attacked by the same elements that we are talking about. And I still remember aapke baad Balraj Dale Saab was attacked, and I clearly remember Dale Saab telling me how you were the first person to reach out to Dale Saab even when you were you were still recuperating from the injuries. Even then you had reached out to Dale Saab, and you reached out to him and you helped him. Sir, this is वो 5-6% numbers में ठीक है सर, but there आप, you know it very well, I know it very well, what the community, forget the Hindu community, what the Sikh community of Canada has to go through in terms of bullying. आप जैसे लोगों को तो physical attacks किए गए हैं, and the intimidation that people, average innocent people, have to face. And in such a scenario, isn't it the responsibility of the political class. I know you were also a part of the political class, and you were attacked when you were part of the political class too. But isn't it the responsibility of the politicians then to say enough is enough? We just can't let this menace hang around.
Oh, I think that it is the responsibility of the politicians. A lot of people say, well, why isn't the other 95% saying something? I mean, people have no obligation to confront these chaps. And, even those who confronted them in the past, sometimes they get tired, they get old. They say, all right, it's not my fight. I've done enough. Human beings get tired. And I think that that fatigue has happened in Canada on that issue. So the other 95% have simply said, let them carry on, let India deal with it, let the government of Canada deal with it. And I think that's wrong. But I can't persuade people to stand up and speak in their homes in the evenings, at dinner parties, and others. You hear them saying, "Look, these people are causing problems for us. We have families back home. We have property back home. We go back almost every year. Like I go back almost every year to see the land and see the people and see friends, although I have no family left in India other than a cousin who just passed away and her children in UP. So I think that it is important not to expect anything from ordinary people, uh, in terms of this fight, but it is important to say, yes, we're worried. The other thing I think that's important for me to say, some of us have never looked at the Indian community as, like, I don't look at Indians as Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, Christians. I look at Indians as Indians. I don't look at Canadians. I don't believe in identity politics. I think that's the death of democracy eventually, if you keep real democracy. So for me, Indian community is Indian community. And some of us happen to be of one faith, others of many others, and so I was really shocked, and I was actually angry at Mr. Pannu coming to Surrey recently and making idiotic statements such as expel Hindus from Canada. And I have, and I was glad to see that politicians rose to the occasion and condemned his statement. But had they condemned separatist activities on Canadian soil long time ago, we wouldn't be here. And that's a point that I keep making again and again, because these politicians need to understand that they have an obligation. If they don't support dismemberment of India, then they have an obligation to say, we don't support the dismemberment of a friendly country. We support the national unity and integrity of India and its borders. But, nobody says that.
And even now, sir, the reason for skepticism is like the famous hoarding that was there for weeks outside the one of the gurudwaras where you are from right now. It was just taken down now. There is a reason why it got taken down now, because the entire international media landscape was looking at Canada, and this was becoming a little too uncomfortable for Canada. So now they had to take it down. But the question is, it was literally calling for the assassination. The words written there were assassination. And this was not there as if, 4 days ago before, or 5 days ago, before Justin Trudeau made this announcement in the House of Commons, this banner it was there for weeks. Anybody who lives in British Columbia, in Vancouver, in Surrey, in and around that Gurudwara knew that this banner was there all the time. Nobody did anything. But suddenly, because now Canada is getting bad PR, these things go off. So how does one take Canada seriously, even now after these banners are taken down or these politicians make these statements?
Well, Canada is my adopted home, and so we all countries have faults, and one of the faults Canada has is that its politicians, many of them, don't have a backbone. And that backbone only happens when you have some principles. Most people don't go into politics because they have principles. They just go because it's something to do. And the usual story is, oh, I want to give back to the community. Well, sometimes they really have nothing to give back to the community except they're seeking personal glory or personal power. And I actually fault politicians of all stripes in this regard, because इस हमाम में सब नंगे हैं.
बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल सर, सारे नंगे हैं। और व्हाट हर्ट्स मी द मोस्ट इज, सर मैं आपको एक पर्सनल किस्सा बताता हूँ। आई वाज देयर रिसेंटली इन टोरंटो, हैविंग अ प्राइवेट डिनर विद अ फ्यू फ्रेंड्स, एंड वन ऑफ देम वाज अ सिख जेंटलमैन। अभी सर पंजाबी में बात कर रहे थे, आई विल डू द ट्रांसलेशन इन हिंदी एंड इंग्लिश फॉर द बेनिफिट of our audiences. And one line really hurt me, and I'll tell you why it hurt me, is because the Gurudwara is not a Sikh place of worship. लोगों को ये समझ में आता, गुरुद्वारे में हिंदू भी जाते हैं, ये कोई मतलब इट्स अ पंजाबी प्लेस ऑफ वर्शिप और इंडियन प्लेस ऑफ वर्शिप। हमारे कल्चर में
Yes,
कभी ये नहीं था कि मंदिर सरदारों ने नहीं जाना और गुरुद्वारे हिंदुओं ने नहीं जाना, हम तो दोनों जगहों पे जाते थे।
absolutely. अभी
एंड
भी ऐसा ही होता है
अभी
वहाँ
भी ऐसी होता है,
हिंदुस्तान में.
या अभी भी होता है। एंड देन बातें करते करते द सिक्स जेंटलमैन टोल्ड हिम, यार मैं अपने बच्चों को अभी गुरुद्वारे नहीं भेजता। द सिक्स जेंटलमैन टोल्ड मी, एंड आई वाज लाइक क्यों, क्या हो गया? बोलते यार, जहाँ यहाँ तो ये हाल है कि गुरुद्वारा है कि मदरसा है, मुझे कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा है, इतना ब्रेन वॉश करते हैं हमारे बच्चों को। सर वेयर डिड द कम्युनिटी गो रॉन्ग? ये कहाँ पहुंच गए हम लोग कि सिखों ने अपने बच्चों को गुरुद्वारे भेजना बंद कर दिया है?
Well, I'm not an expert on religion. Yeah, so I won't make a commentary on religion or what's happening to the religion. But I know I'm quite secular. I never spoke to my own children about religion or caste until my middle son, who was a second year UBC student at that time, came running home and said, Dad, are we Jats? He couldn't even say Jat because we'd never talked about this. He learned about caste from university, from other children, other students who brought that from their homes. And unfortunately, there has been a huge propaganda by the Khalistanis in this country and other Western countries that Sikhs and Hindus have hated each other for centuries. The fact is, until quite recently, in many Hindu families, the firstborn male used to be made a Sikh, to wear a turban and have a beard. There are families still like that in India where the eldest is a Sikh and others are practicing Hindus, and they live together. And so, but these elements, separatist elements, have been successful in spreading misinformation about the truth about Hindus and Sikhs. And part of the reason, I mean, some people may have grievances about 84 and what happened in Delhi and other cities, or what happened at the Golden Temple. I'm sure they have grievances, and some of them are legitimate. But in India, because people live together, intermarry, are friendships, centuries old relationships, and there was never any tension ever until 1984. And but some of us are feeding the West, in particular, this this misinformation, this history that I'm not aware of where it comes from, that somehow Hindus have always hated Sikhs and Sikhs are being persecuted in Punjab, which is not the case. Because I was in Punjab in May. I mean, of course, police have done dumb stuff in the 80s, and I mean, Indian police isn't known for doing right stuff all the time, and police excesses and torture and other things ought to be condemned. They deserve to be condemned. But to say that Sikhs as a community are persecuted is just the most bizarre thing you can hear. And these foreign journalists, Canadian journalists, Western journalists keep repeating that assertion to people like me when they're interviewing me.
But sir, then what do you think? Why have we come here the way we have? That, as you say, journalists across the globe keep coming and telling you, a literal veteran of the Indo-Canadian community, of the Indian community, probably the most respected voice from Canada, where literally, अगर आप बोलोगे तो लोग आपको सुनेंगे. I mean, even last month when I was there in the audience, the moment you spoke, everybody shuts up, and because that's how you've worked for the community for so long. But then द condescending voices, और ये ऐसा नहीं होता है कि हमारे ओरिजिन के लोग होते हैं. I mean, I meet some random white guy telling me about my country as if I don't know anything. So how do we correct them then?
Well, I think it can only be corrected if the politicians educate themselves. And it's an obligation of a politician. If you speak about a particular community, you have an obligation to know the history of that community, know what the reality of that community is or communities are. And in that sense, I think Canadian politicians, like most politicians, are quite ignorant of other countries. And I don't blame them, but it is important if they're going to judge issues in the Indo-Canadian community based on religion or based on history, then they should know that, in fact, Sikhs aren't only Sikhs if they wear turbans and have beards. There are Sikhs like you and I that don't have turbans and beards, and they're Sikhs. They're not Singhs, maybe in that sense, but that basic fact is not known to these people. And I can't educate everyone in the world, so I don't consider it my duty to lecture anyone on religion. But I blame the politicians at all levels, and they don't make the effort to find out the truth. And that's why, in fact, we are in a mess that we are in Canada.
Sir, the political landscape now, I don't know how many people know about how the Liberal Party. I mean, I have to ask you this question is because you were part of the Liberal Party. So, and before somebody thinks I'm not giving the Conservatives a free run, I know this Khalistani problem is across political outfits, and I want to state this on the record. But I have to ask you this question. I mean, even the mainstream media outlets in Canada have covered the story of how, the more sensible voices in the Liberal Party amongst the Indian community and the Sikh community or the Hindu Punjabi community and the Punjabi community
Yeah,
in large, they get sidelined. The famous case being one of the candidates that you had said should have been representing the Liberal Party of Canada was sidelined for someone who is a current minister. I mean, everybody knows the story. I'm not making it up, guys. Go read CBC. CBC covered this.
it's a true story.
So, sir, how does आज सर ये बोया था उन्होंने आज से 10-15 साल पहले, ये बोने के बाद ये इनको फल मिल रहे हैं। मैं जानबूझ के ये हिंदी में प्रश्न पूछ रहा हूँ और
Yeah.
पंजाबी में भी पूछ सकता था, मगर मगर अभी भी इनको समझ में नहीं आता कि जो इन्होंने बोया वो ये बोया उन्होंने।
Well, you and I have both the larger perspective and the smaller perspective about the community. Some of these politicians, all they know is political campaigns and elections and fundraising and activity. They don't have the perspective. Some of them might. They won't have the perspective that you and I have or the knowledge that you and I might have. And I don't fault them for that. But I say once again, yes, moderate voices in the Liberal Party have been sidelined. Um, Nobody sidelined me. I was just defeated at the polls and I decided not to run again. I was never going to run, in fact, in the election when I lost the election because the party wasn't doing too well. I'm still a member of the Liberal Party federally, but I provincially have always voted for the NDP still. Because I think they are more progressive provincially than the alternative. But I agree with you that the separatist elements, under the garb of human rights activists and others, have infiltrated all political parties. And of course, Mr. Singh leads the NDP, and his credentials on India are suspect too. I mean, he's been banned from going to India. Only India can tell why, but I know I have seen videos of him speaking at Sikh sovereignty conferences. Those videos don't exist anymore on the net, but I'd seen them when he was running for leadership. I know for a fact, I was in fact told after the fact, after the election, that in the last election that I ran in 2011, he was invited by the Khalistanis to come and speak at a conference in Surrey, which headlined, the banner was Defeat Ujjal Dosanjh, and he was the guest speaker. Why would a politician from Ontario, an NDP politician from Ontario, come and speak in Surrey, not even Vancouver, where my writing is, at a conference to defeat me. I mean, it's like, it's not as if I'm a giant. I'm just an ordinary human being.
Yeah, and sir, ये जो कहानियां है, these stories, I bet you, because this is the real politic, this is the inside baseball of Canadian politics, that most Indians don't know how dirty the political landscape of Canada has become, how an honest person, uh, you know who actually means well, who wants to do some work for the average Canadian, for the community at large, they have been completely sidelined. I mean, just the story when Balraj Dale Saab told me how the Canadian primaries have been hijacked now, that any onga ponga, irrespective of them being a registered member of Canada, to chhod do political party, they don't even have to be a Canadian and they can come and vote in the primaries, and this is how primaries are getting hijacked. So मतलब क्या हाल है सर, देश कहाँ जा रहा है फिर?
Well, I think for the sake of becoming freer and more freedom loving and more liberal, the Liberal Party has opened itself to voting by any Canadian, any person who lives in Canada. You don't even have to be a member. At least during the time Trudeau was elected, didn't even have to be a member. You just had to self-register and say, I want to vote. And that's, I think that the parties have to do a better job at vetting politicians and candidates, and they're not doing a very good job. And we are into identity politics even within political parties. You know, no matter the quality of the candidate, we need a Hindu, we need a Sikh, we need a black person, we need a brown person. Um, if that goes on, I think we're in for real trouble in Canada. We need to get beyond the skin color, beyond religion. We need to talk about ideals that we stand for, principles that we stand for the betterment of Canada. And that's usually never a discussion when you're nominating people. It's like, it's all about, you vote for me. Like, I'll tell you a story. This is a true story. When I first ran for nomination in 1979, I was asked by veteran NDPers to run. I was a member of the NDP provincially. And so the other people started signing up against me. So I went and signed people up. So I'm this is a true story. I'm at an Indo Punjabi home, and so the chap asks me who the other candidates are, and I told him, there's this other person running, and then you may have Sati Pandakur running. Sati Pandakur was the first Indo-Canadian city councillor in Vancouver, and a well-respected UBC professor of planning. And so the chap says to me, "Oh, this other Punjabi guy, he is dad. I'm not going to vote for him." But Sati, he's not Punjabi. I'm not going to vote for him. I said to the guy, I said, "I don't want your vote. Just because, if you want to vote for me, just because I'm a Punjabi, I don't want your vote. I want your vote if you think I am a better candidate than the other two, if they both run." And I didn't sign the chap up.
सर, आज के जमाने में आपको कोई क्या कहेगा, आपको पता है, यही तो आपकी प्रॉब्लम है. People will go like, यही तो प्रॉब्लम है उज्जवल साहब की, यही क्यों वो अपने सिद्धांतों में अटक गए, राजनीति बदल गई है. But it's sad, sir. अभी क्या बोलूं, even in Calgary, Falcon Ridge, जो NDP candidate है, I mean, everybody knows he is a Khalistani sympathizer and supporter. Like, you just have to go to his Facebook and scan his Facebook. ओ बंदा भी खालिस्तान को सपोर्ट करता है. Like, everywhere you go in Canada, हर जगह आप जाओगे. मगर सर, मेरे को एक बात बताओ, ये मतलब ऐसी बेशर्मी की भी हद होती है कि ग्लोबल मेल जैसा मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया आउटलेट writes things like, Mr. Nijjar, the plumber, sir, India has sent dossiers after dossiers. There is an open Interpol red corner notice for Nijjar. I understand Canada finds this disturbing that if proven, India conducted this act, and even I would say it's abominable as an Indian citizen. I'm not Canadian, I'm Indian, right? But the point is that यार उसको प्लम्बर तो ना बोलो, प्लम्बर तो अभी नेक्स्ट क्या होगा, मतलब कोई और फिर टेररिस्ट आएगा उसको बोलेंगे इलेक्ट्रिशियन था ये.
Well, I didn't know Mr. Nijjar. I knew of him because he was written up about all the charges and accusations he was facing from India. Um, I saw recently his photograph posted online by people, and he is standing there tall with a gun in his hands, right in front of him, holding the gun. Now that doesn't seem to be a very peace-loving portrait of the gentleman. So I don't, I let's say no more about that.
Yeah,
The
it's really
other thing I
unfortunate.
think India could do better, and I'm sorry, but this is the truth. I mean, I was speaking to the journalists this morning. One of them said, "Well, you know, we had sent a list of 10 terrorists to Canada. Canada did nothing. But India, Canada have an extradition treaty, and pursuant to that extradition treaty, Mr. Sidhu and his sister um, are now being prosecuted in Punjab because India sought their extradition. Canada extradited them legally back to India to face charges in the murder of um, the Mr. Sidhu's sister's daughter. Sister and him are both facing those charges in India. So I think it's well and good to alert the government of India, Canada to the presence of these extremists in or terrorists in Canada, if that's the case. But one needs to go beyond that and begin formal extradition proceedings. Otherwise a country can't just pick up somebody and send it to you.
But sir, an Indian journalist, Aditya Raj Kaul, was recently reporting that we have formally sent in the last 10 years, I think around 10 plus extradition requests to Canada, and those extradition requests have not been honored. And in the case of Nijjar, Punjab police had written to the Canadian authorities, and this has been reported extensively in Indian media. And again, the Canadian authorities did not act on Nijjar. And these are just the hardcore
Was it?
realities.
Yeah, well, if it was a formal extradition request, with evidence to back it up, and the Canadians took no notice of it, then obviously it's wrong.
Hmm. But I want to take a few audience
I'm not
questions.
aware of that. Yeah.
I want to take a few questions because आपने बोला था not more than 45 minutes. I'm going to stick to the 45-minute limit, and I'll honor whatever you wanted me to do. So somebody has asked, does Canada believe it's untouchable because 77% of its exports are to USA? So is that the reason they treat international relations in such a lackadaisical manner, because they're so isolated?
I don't think so. I think that the people who do business, they don't really worry about politics, but business people want to make money, and they'll go trade with whoever it is profitable for them to trade with. I mean, that's a question, obviously, that's begging me to say somehow that Canada doesn't view India as a great place to do business with. I think that the truth actually belies that. The fact is that the previous government under Mr. Harper and even under Mr. Trudeau have been negotiating a free trade agreement. They were close to the conclusion of this. I, in fact, met with the High Commissioner, Canadian High Commissioner, when they launched my novel at the High Commission, actually, in India. And they were very kind to me. And he had told me that they're very close to concluding the free trade agreement. And so I'm saddened that's no longer proceeding at this moment. So I think that these bumps happen in international relations. It's like any family relationships. Bumps happen. You have to figure them out rather than become jingoistic and start accusing each other of saying, "Oh, you are bad to us. We're good to you." I think we need to calm down and figure out how we proceed further.
सर एग्जैक्टली इसीलिए तो मैंने आपको बुलाया कि who better to tell people to calm down? क्या 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 कहते हैं हमारे पंजाबी में, मिट्टी पाओ. I mean, if there ever was a occasion of मिट्टी पाओ, it was this right now, because believe me when I say this, I mean, आपको तो पता नहीं कितने कॉल आ गए होंगे, मुझे नहीं पता. मुझे ईमेल पे ईमेल आ रहे हैं जो कनाडा में लोग हैं, ये बोलते हैं ये क्या हो रहा है, हमको टेंशन हो रही है, ये why do we have these bad relations? We're not enemy nations. And especially in the case of Canada, sir, when India is a top 10 trading partner of Canada, I'm not even making this up. These are like Canadian government statistics that India is number 9. And in fact, Canada has nothing but things to lose by destroying its relationship. I even last time Terry Milevsky was on the podcast, I told Terry, why aren't we signing the trade deal? And we're constantly going into these shenanigans. So I completely echo your thoughts. Another very interesting question about the Canadian state capacity was, is the state capacity in Canada getting deprecated? Because these symptoms, for an outsider, they indicate, these incidents indicate symptoms of a broader underlying problem. So is Canada having state capacity issues, or this is just willful ignorance?
Oh, I don't think it's the question of state capacity or lack thereof. I think it's a question of political will or lack thereof. And unfortunately, the political will to confront this issue of a separatist movement, like a rootless thing, burgeoning in Canada, whereas in India, it's nowhere to be found. I mean, I was in my village in May. There was not a saffron turban to be found. Lots of turbans, but not a saffron turban to be found. So I think that it's a lack of political will, and politicians in Canada, I think that people, Indians or non-Indians, they should talk to their politicians and say, why have you not spoken up on this issue? Why have you not try and dissuade these people from using Canadian soil to try and dismember a friendly country? I think people need to ask questions of their federal representatives in the House of Commons in that regard.
So, sir, someone has asked, how come there is no pushback to the Khalistani nonsense from the wider Canadian populace? They're not just talking about people of Indian origin. Given that Khalistan now has become a front for so many illegal activities like drug trafficking, gang wars, and many other things, because that's a real menace. Like, it's not a joke that Surrey is the number one crime hub in terms of absolute statistics, even by Stats Canada, in terms of violence. And even Brampton is right there.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that the larger society will not say much on this issue, they may feel about it, is because some of us are quick to say, "Oh, you white guys, you're racist. You can't talk about this. You think all of us are like this." And so, the identity politics has really frightened people away from being able to comment. And that's number one. Number two, I think that we shouldn't expect ordinary people to be fighting these fights. It's not their fight. That's why, in fact, 95% of the Sikhs aren't fighting this fight. I mean, if they started going to the temples and saying, "Stop it, you guys," they might stop. But they're not saying that because, well, they're afraid of repercussions, both physical and other. And they're busy making a living, raising children, grandchildren, taking them to school, taking them to events, weddings and things, and life goes on. So you can't really transfer that responsibility from the politician's shoulder to ordinary citizens' shoulder. I think it's the politicians that should shoulder that responsibility.
वैसे सर, साउथ कैरोलिना में अमेरिका में एक गुरुद्वारे ने, दे डिड टेक थिंग्स इनटू देयर हैंड्स, एंड देयर वर पीपल हु हैड पुट फोटोज ऑफ पिंडरावाले, and the community inside the gurdwara, they took all those photos out. They said only Darbar Sahib and Guru Granth Sahib will be respected in this area. No other thing will be allowed, and they did take them out. So I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, well, I think same thing happened in Canada in several gurdwaras post 84, post 85. But in some gurdwaras, you have all of those portraits, including those of Talvinder Parmar, the Air India terrorist. His portraits hang inside and outside temples.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I saw Gurudwara in California where I don't know why they think walking over Narendra Modi and the India flag makes a statement of any sort. But yeah, it's funny. I mean, the things they do. But sir, before we wrap the discussion up, once again, a lot of people are worried and they literally want to know what is the road ahead, sir. So abhi स्यापा तो पड़ गया, as they say. अभी हुने की करना है. So what do we do now? So what do you think? Has the Liberal Party asked you?
Oh no, I just pay the annual Laurier uh, fee to Liberal Party. They don't ask anybody. Even the former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien was heard to complain some months ago that nobody ever talks to him. So the political culture in these countries is such that once you're gone, you're gone. Generally speaking, and I'm one of those, and I have no problem with that. I enjoy my time off. Um, I think that the best we can do is not make outrageous statements, not cause fear to be spread further, um, and not begin to look at least within the Indian community, at people as Hindus and Sikhs. Because I think that when we want to talk about the community, for me, Indo-Canadian community is one. And just because, you know, Pannu has said something that is absolutely horrible, but there is a 500-year history of Hindu-Sikh relations, closeness, family ties, every other tie that you can imagine, to actually um, confront whatever is being alleged by Mr. Pannu. And I think he should be ignored. That's the best thing you can do to someone like that. And I must say, I was shocked at what he said, and I was glad, as I said earlier, that these politicians came out and condemned him. The next step is to make sure that he's never allowed back into Canada to spread hatred.
Yeah, I hope they listen to you. But sir, on behalf of everyone, and I know आप मेरे को बोलोगे फिर ये क्यों कर रहा है, मगर करना पड़ेगा. On behalf of the entire community in Canada, I really want to thank you. You've been a voice of sanity for many decades now for the Indian community. आपने, with great personal sacrifice, people, like I said, I wanted you here because I wanted 25 and below young kids to know what you had to go through for standing up for your principles, literally physically, when you were battered and bruised and fighting for your life. But a lot of these kids may not know about it. So thank you very much for doing whatever you do. But आजकल आप author हो sir, so अभी ये author वाली journey अच्छी है कि politician वाली?
It was fun. I mean, it was difficult fun when I was in politics. It was different. I used to, then afterwards I blogged and I did my autobiography, Journey After Midnight. I wanted to write fiction long time ago, back in the 80s. And then 84 happened, and just one thing led to another. And now I'm writing fiction. And the first novel, The Past Is Never Dead. People should buy it, enjoy. It's the story of an untouchable kid who comes to England, how caste ensnares him even in England and follows him.
Perfect. So, sir, once again, thank you very much for coming. I've learned a lot reading you, listening to you over the years, and I truly mean this. Thank you very much for coming. It's a personal honor for me. I've looked up to you in many ways for so many years. मैं तो आपको, आप मेरे बारे में जानते नहीं थे, मगर मैं आपको जानता था. तो मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई आपको मिलके last month, and I hope we meet again and again. And once again, thank you very much for
Thank you.
coming.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll wrap it up. But once again, before we wrap it up, in the description of the podcast, all the details to buy Ujjal ji's books, his social media handles, everything are there in the description of the podcast. Believe me when I say this, there are very few good people left out there, and Ujjal Dosanjh is one of them. He was like, "Beta, मैं 45 minutes से ज़्यादा बात नहीं करूँगा." So I stuck to the limit. I stuck to the 45-minute limit. But these are the kind of people that have literally fought for the Indian community, have given their life for the Indian community. And I don't know if a lot of people even realize, at times, what was given up for us by these people. Like, I don't have words. I still remember the interview from 1985 of Ujjal Dosanjh. I can't share it because CBC will give a copyright strike. But I want all of you to go and Google that interview. When he was actually injured, he was in the hospital, and there was a CBC journalist that went in the hospital, and I and had asked him that, "What are you going to do after this attack?" And Ujjal Dosanjh's answer was, "I'm going to continue doing what I keep continuing to what I do, is fight against these people who are against basic human rights and against freedom and are against liberal values." He's a man who stood up for what he believed in. So I would request all of you, whether you're Indian or not, it doesn't matter. If you're a listener of this podcast, go buy his books. And if you can support, please do support the Cārvāka podcast. This podcast runs on members only. So if you can, please become a member of the Cārvāka podcast, whether you're on YouTube or on Patreon or on Fanmo. If you want to buy the merchandise, go and buy it on kushalmehra.com or on Kadak Merch. You can send your donations through UPI. If you cannot do any of this, just subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave your comments in the comment section. If you're an audio only listener, leave a rating on Spotify, iTunes, comments over there. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, namaste. Take care. Bye.